Welcome to the debate. Imagine abandoning your entire life today.
Just packing up and leaving.
Exactly. Your home, your wealth, your network, your security, and you just walk out into a barren, unmapped desert simply because, well, a voice in the dark told you to.
Right. If someone did that today, we'd probably stage an intervention.
Oh, absolutely. We would call it a mental health crisis. But thousands of years ago, stepping into that kind of absolute void wasn't a crisis. It was the foundational act of faith.
And it's an act that completely defies our modern sensibilities. We really don't like the dark. We don't like the unmapped void.
No, we don't.
We desperately want to know the destination before we even start packing our bags.
Right. Which brings us to the core of our discussion today. We are looking at the premise laid out in Olusola A. Arogan's work. The book is called Following the Faith of Abraham, Moving from Nothing to Greatness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I look at that subtitle, Moving from Nothing to Greatness, I see a really brilliant, historically grounded distillation of how faith actually works.
Okay, but
Let me just frame this really quickly. I think it highlights a fundamental mechanism. It shows that total reliance during deep uncertainty inherently builds a legacy. It bridges that gap between, starting with zero and achieving a monumental historical impact.
See, I come at it from a completely different way. While the outcome of Abraham's life was undeniably significant, I worry that framing his journey as moving to greatness is a bit dangerous.
Dangerous how?
Well, it imposes a modern success narrative onto a story that was, in its absolute essence, about radical, blind submission. My concern is that when we focus on the greatness, we risk turning ancient covenantal obedience into like a self-help commodity.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, we make it about the reward rather than the actual surrender.
Well, I see why you think that, but let's look at the mechanics of what Abraham is describing. Let's start with this concept of nothing, because I really don't think he's using nothing as just a dramatic buzzword here.
Right, it's literal.
It is. He's demanding something incredibly severe from the reader. In the ancient Near East, your family, your tribe, and your land were your entire identity.
Yeah,
So to leave that was to become a non-entity. The nothing isn't merely a low bank account balance, it's the absolute stripping away of your personal autonomy.
oh, I completely agree on the severity of the nothing. That's historically sound. Where we diverge is what happens next.
Well, let me offer an analogy that might help clarify my reading of Aragon. Think of it like a seed buried in dormant soil.
Okay.
The nothing is a necessary burial. The hard outer shell of that seed has to be completely destroyed. Its independent existence has to be basically wiped out before it can ever shoot up through the soil.
Right.
So the greatness of the eventual tree isn't some artificial reward handed out at the end, right? It is the organic biological imperative of the seed once it yields to the dirt. In the same way, greatness is just a natural byproduct of radical faith.
Okay, that is a really beautiful image. The seed and the soil. But let's stay inside that analogy for a second. Have you considered the perspective of the seed itself?
Go on.
The seed in the dark doesn't know it's going to become a tree.
Well,
It doesn't have a conceptual framework for a canopy or for the shade it will eventually provide. It just experiences the crushing pressure of the dirt, the moisture, the absolute dissolution of its identity.
sure, but it still grows.
Yes, but when we frame the Abrahamic journey as moving from nothing to greatness, we are injecting what historians call a teleological narrative. We are judging the beginning of the journey by the fact that we already know the happy ending.
So you're saying we give the reader the ending before they've suffered through the beginning.
Precisely. Abraham didn't have the book cover with the sunburst and the golden wheat. He didn't have a roadmap promising him this massive, great legacy. He had sand.
Sand and a voice.
Sand, silence, and a command to walk away from everything he knew. When we tell a modern reader that faith is about moving to greatness, it removes the very uncertainty that makes the faith authentic in the first place.
I hear you. I do. But does knowing the architecture of the universe really negate the pain of the process? I'll concede that Abraham was in the dark.
Very much in the dark.
Right. But Aragon is offering us a retrospective theological truth about how faith operates. We don't do anyone any favors by pretending faith is just an endless void with no destination at all. The destination, the greatness, is part of the divine design.
But the risk is that the destination becomes the idol. I mean, think about a listener right now who is sitting in their own version of nothing.
Okay.
Maybe they're facing a devastating career failure or a deep personal crisis. If they adopt the mindset that they are moving from nothing to greatness, their eyes fixate entirely on the greatness.
You think they lose focus on the obedience?
Completely. They start evaluating their spiritual progress by how much success they are accumulating. They ask, is my influence expanding? Is my bank account recovering? That is a distinctly modern, hyper-individualistic way of measuring a human life.
But wait, let me push back on the idea that greatness is just a modern individualistic invention.
Okay, how so?
Because if we look at the actual text of the Ancient Covenant, the very source material Eärguen is drawing from, the promise literally says, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great.
Right.
Greatness is the literal vocabulary of the ancient promise. Aragorn didn't just invent that out of thin air for a 21st century audience.
Well, he didn't invent the word, no. But the translation of that word across millennia is where the danger lies.
How? The word is right there in the text.
Because the ancient concept of a great name or a great nation was entirely communal. It was intergenerational. It was about lineage and divine sovereignty over centuries.
True. It wasn't about instant gratification.
Exactly. Abram's greatness was largely realized long after he was dead and buried. I mean, he spent his entire life living in tents, and the only piece of land he ever actually owned was the cave he bought to bury his wife.
That is a fair point.
So, when Aragorn uses the phrase moving from nothing to greatness, it resonates brilliantly with our current culture of personal development. But a modern reader doesn't see greatness and think, oh, my great-great-grandchildren will be numerous.
Right, they think about next week.
They think my career will flourish, my family will be secure right now, my personal struggles will be validated in my lifetime. We are taking the rough, unhewn stone of ancient obedience and essentially polishing it into a prosperity narrative.
I mean, that's a fair critique of how a modern audience might misinterpret it. But is the framework itself flawed just because the scale changes?
Expand on that. What do you mean by the scale changing?
Well, I mean, that universal laws of faith can apply on different scales. If the fundamental mechanism is that radical submission to divine will produces a flourishing outcome, why shouldn't a modern reader apply that mechanism to their internal spiritual landscape? Or even their daily life? Yes, the ancient covenant was collective, but it was initiated through an intensely personal individual choice. Abraham alone had to pack his tents.
He did?
So translating that collective outcome into a personal reality is how these ancient texts remain culturally and spiritually alive for people today. Aragorn is taking an ancient principle and making it operative for the modern believer.
It only remains operative if the culture doesn't hijack the definition of the outcome.
Which is always a risk.
A huge risk. If a modern reader defines greatness strictly as wealth or comfort or stability, and they use Aragorn's framework as a tool to achieve it, they have completely inverted the Abrahamic model. They are seeking the exact stability that Abraham was commanded to leave behind.
Okay, that brings us to a fascinating ethical dilemma. We are really talking about motivation here.
Yes, exactly.
Why does someone choose to follow this faith? You seem to be arguing that if greatness is the advertised destination, it fundamentally compromises the ethical purity of the obedience.
I am absolutely arguing that. If I obey a command solely because I have been guaranteed a golden field of wheat at the end of it, my obedience is transactional.
You think it becomes a contract?
It's not faith. It's a spiritual investment strategy. True faith requires a willingness to remain in the nothingness forever, if that is what the divine sovereign demands. The moment greatness becomes the hook to get people to believe, we have shifted away from theology and moved into spiritual commerce.
See, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, mostly because I think it creates a false dichotomy between pure motives and positive outcomes.
How is it a false dichotomy?
Because Aragorn's framework doesn't make greatness the motive. It identifies it as the inevitable result of proper alignment. Let me finish this thought. You are demanding an almost nihilistic purity from faith,
where to be truly authentic, it has to be tragic or austere. Why can't the logical conclusion of radical trust be greatness? Let's talk about ontological realities, meaning things that are just baked into the very nature of existence.
Okay, I'm tracking with you.
If we believe the universe is structured by a benevolent designer, then operating in alignment with that designer's will should naturally produce flourishing. It's cause and effect.
Right.
Fire produces heat. Gravity pulls objects together. Radical faith produces greatness. Observing and naming that reality doesn't make the act transactional. It just acknowledges what is true.
But we have to look at the edge cases to test if that is universally true. What about the individuals throughout history who exhibit radical Abrahamic faith, who surrender their autonomy, who step into the absolute void and die in the void?
You mean people who never see the greatness?
Exactly. History is filled with spiritual figures, martyrs, and everyday people who experienced the nothing, but never saw the harvest on this side of eternity.
That is heavy, yes.
If we present a linear, guaranteed trajectory from nothing to greatness, we risk disenfranchising those whose faith leads them into deep, unresolvable suffering. We essentially tell them, well, you must not have had enough faith because you haven't achieved greatness.
Wow. Yeah.
That's why I insist on protecting the austerity of the ancient narrative. Abraham's faith was exceptional precisely because he maintained it when the empirical evidence of greatness was entirely absent.
I think that's an incredibly important nuance. And honestly, it actually strengthens Aragon's framing if we look at how Abraham's life actually played out.
How so?
You mentioned earlier that we want the destination before we pack our bags. But the moving in Aragon's title is a continuum. It's an agonizingly slow process. And part of that process is the complete redefinition of what the word greatness even means to the person experiencing it.
Unpack that a bit. How does the process redefine the goal?
Well, look at the ultimate test in Abraham's life, the binding of Isaac. Abraham is promised greatness through this specific son, and then he is asked to sacrifice him.
Right, the paradox.
It is the ultimate paradox. He is asked to violently sever himself from the very greatness he was promised, purely out of obedience.
Which perfectly illustrates my point. The obedience had to supersede the promise of greatness.
Yes, but look at why. By the time Abraham was asked to do that, his character had been so thoroughly forged by decades of nothingness and wandering that his ego was completely detached from the outcome.
The greatness he eventually stepped into wasn't a modern egocentric success where he gets to boast about his legacy. It was a deeply rooted, unshakable alignment with a reality larger than himself. So when Aragon says, moving from nothing to greatness, I read that as an invitation into a crucible.
A crucible that burns away the very desire for the greatness you thought you wanted.
Precisely. You might come to the book for the greatness because, hey, we are human and we want success. But the nothingness refines you so thoroughly that by the time the true spiritual greatness arrives, you are actually capable of holding it without being destroyed by your own ego.
I can appreciate that synthesis. That is a much richer reading.
Thank you.
The idea that the nothingness isn't just a starting line, but a necessary psychological and spiritual purging. It reframes the nothing to greatness pipeline from a cheap success formula into a profoundly demanding transformation. But, and you knew there was a but coming,
I did. I was waiting for it.
I still maintain that we must be rigorously cautious when applying this today. We have to constantly cross-examine our own motivations, especially when reading texts that promise us something good.
Right.
Are we truly willing to embrace the nothing if the greatness is deferred to a generation we will never live to see? If a modern reader's answer to that is no, then they aren't actually following the faith of Abraham. They are just using his ancient resume to brand their own modern ambition.
That is a piercing metric to judge ourselves against. And honestly, it's the exact kind of internal friction I think Aragon's work is meant to provoke.
It should provoke friction.
Yes.
It forces the reader to confront their own definitions. If your idea of greatness can't survive the desert, it probably wasn't spiritual greatness to begin with.
Agreed.
And I think that's where the power of examining these ancient stories really lies. It's not in flattening them into easy, 5-step formulas for modern success.
No, absolutely not.
It's in letting their strangeness, their severity, and their profound demands challenge our comfortable paradigms. Abraham's choices were shocking. They should still shock us.
Which brings us toward a natural convergence point in our discourse today. We've been debating the underlying mechanics of Aragon's framework. My position remains that the subtitle, Moving from Nothing to Greatness, provides a vital, accurate teleology.
It maps out how faith inherently alters the trajectory of human reality, taking the raw material of our vulnerability and transforming it into an enduring legacy.
And I maintain my caution. While the transformation of the individual is undeniable, we have to guard against letting the modern allure of success overshadow the grueling, outcome-blind obedience that actually defined Abraham's life.
Right.
The expectation of a recognizable reward is always threatening to corrupt the radical surrender that true faith requires.
Yet, despite our different angles on the vocabulary, we both agree that Aragon has identified a profound dynamic of change. In this model, faith is never static.
No, it never is.
It is not merely an intellectual agreement to a set of ideas, it is an active catalyst. It definitively alters the trajectory of the person who practices it.
Yes, the journey from the familiar to the unknown invariably changes the traveler, regardless of what words we use to describe the destination. The practice of faith demands that we grapple with the absolute void that precedes any kind of harvest.
It really invites listeners to examine their own operating systems. If you are sitting in a place of uncertainty right now, you are left to form your own conclusion on how you view the purpose of that tension.
Exactly. Do you view it through the lens of its ultimate transformative outcomes, the sunburst over the wheat? Or do you view it through the intrinsic, austere value of its demands in the dark?
And perhaps that tension is the truest reflection of the source material. It demands that we look deeper into the nature of spiritual legacy, far beyond our initial superficial assumptions about what it actually means to be successful. Which brings us right back to where we started, standing in the dark, looking up at an unmapped sky. Some of us are drawing lines, finding the constellations, charting a map toward a promised, tangible greatness.
And some of us are just standing in awe of the terrifying void, letting go of our autonomy and waiting for a whisper to tell us where to place our foot next.
Thank you for engaging in this discourse. Until next time.